This game sucks.
Hello, and welcome to the Interstate Gamers Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin, aka K-Slugs.
My name is Peter, aka Deal for Real, and I'm also your host.
And welcome back, everyone. We've made it. You know, we've done our hiatus thing, and now we're back and ready on that season 5 grind. And I'll have you know, this is our 50th episode for the Interstate Gamers Podcast.
Damn, dude. I believe that's called a sesquicentennial, if my fact checking is correct. I think our 3-year anniversary is coming up.
Oh shit!
At the end of this year. But yeah, we got some good games in the bank, and season 5, it's got a pretty stacked lineup, if I do say so myself. Kev, do you have anything we need to talk about before we just get right into this frickin' game?
No, I don't think so. I think let's do it, Pete boy. Let's get into season 5. I know this much anticipated season. We've had a lot of people asking us, when is it going to be? And are you going to do this game? Well, now you're about to find out what games we're going to do. So speaking of the games we're going to do, P-Boy, what's the game for this week?
Oh, I don't know, man. Just a little something called Super Mario 64.
What?
Oh my goodness. I bet you couldn't tell, all you listeners, from the title of the video. But yes, Super Mario 64, a game which... I've said this about a few games, but this one, how much introduction does this game really need? You know, people throw out the word iconic a lot nowadays, I feel. But this game is one of those truly, truly iconic games. One of the first fully 3D, like three-dimensional movement games to hit the mass market. Revolutionary for all these reasons. I mean, if you're an epic gamer like we are, then you already know all about this. But what's interesting is that Kevin and I think, have some different experiences with this game and our histories of gaming. Kevin, why don't you kind of talk about yours?
Yeah, so I'd played it on and off as a kid, but I had never owned it, which was kind of weird because I was a huge Nintendo 64 fan, and I had played it at my cousin's house and things like that. A reoccurring theme if you've listened to the podcast. But yeah, I never owned it, and I always wanted to. But then I think later in life, I was kind of like, well, I've played this game. What do I really need to see? Like, I've played a good majority of the game, and I was like, I feel like I don't need to play it. But once we decided we were going to review this game, which I thought was a really great idea, I was like, okay, you know what? Let's just sit down and play it start to finish and, just see what we really feel about this game. Like, how's it feel? And so me and my brother started out playing it. We would switch off every star, and then Z-Link got into the mix there. And so we were all like just switching off every star, which was really fun. And then we beat it with a 70-star run, hot, fresh 70-star run. So that was really fun.
Yeah. Yeah. So a more recent experience for sure, at least as far as, like really sitting down and intentionally playing through the whole thing. Of course, there's 120 stars total, but 70, I
like to consider myself a minimalist.
Minimalist, yeah. Always doing the bare minimum. That's the K-Slugs that I know. I'm just kidding. So my experience was pretty different. I remember sitting with my older brother when he received the N64 for Christmas or his birthday or something. I remember watching him unbox it, and we got it a few years late. So, it wasn't like, I wasn't like 2 years old. I was more like 4 or 5. But yeah, I remember this game just being one of the very first games I ever played. And I had the player's guide for it. Or I guess my brother did. I'll just read it. Love that book. And definitely did like 120 stars when I was younger. And I've played it. I did a 120-star run recently, or a couple years ago, and then did a 70-star run in advance of this recording. So had the old school memories, but then also refreshed with a little bit of more modern experience. Modern experience, though, not really applicable to this game. It is a classic for sure. It came out in the summer of '96 in Japan, not the US. Sorry, I couldn't resist. Dude,
I imagine that moment when, like, you and your brother are unboxing the Nintendo 64 at Christmas, and you're like, "Oh my god, Nintendo 64!" Sorry, that's what I was envisioning the whole time you were saying that. I was like,
classic YouTube moment. Yeah, my brother must have been like 12 or 14, so not as young as the kid in that video, but right. I'm sure he was stoked. He was He was an Epic gamer and still is, in fact. But yeah, this game came out in the summer of '96 in Japan, came out a little later in the other regions. And as I said earlier, super revolutionary game with the 3D movement and all that sort of stuff. Launch title for the N64. Pretty big deal. I don't think we need too much more context than that because, this game is so famous and all. So let's go ahead and start with the gameplay. Kev Boy, I know you like to start with the gameplay.
Yes, for such an iconic game as this, I'll just go ahead and lead off this iconic segment.
This game sucks.
So I think this game, I had a lot more fun with this game than I thought that I would. I didn't think I was going to have a horrible time because I'd played it before and I think it's going to be a pretty good experience. But, just kind of sitting down and playing on the classic N64 console, I was like, okay, I'm having a blast going through this game and playing it, start to finish, switching off with, my brother and Chris. I was just like, man, this is how gaming is supposed to be. In terms of the gameplay, the movement it was really fun to move around in this game. There's a whole lot of different movement options that make the game feel almost unique in the way at which a person could play. Every person has a different style in which they could play it. If you're not super optimal speedrunner, everybody probably likes to think that they are when they go back and play this game. But yeah, it was just really neat to see the different styles of play. But one critique that I do have in terms of the movement is I never really liked the startup time for some of the moves that Mario has. Like when you're trying to run, you really can never just run. There's a huge startup time. So unless you cancel that with a jump and a kick, it's really slow to get moving in one direction. I've never really understood that design decision.
Yeah, I wonder if I agree. By the way, it doesn't bother me so much, but I know it's different from games like I think Odyssey. It's a lot more instant with the momentum and stuff. But I would imagine that since this was such an early 3D game and most people would be unfamiliar, if not all people, they probably wanted to give yourself a little bit of wiggle room as far as when you actually got up to full speed, so people weren't darting around on accident. If I had to come up with a reason, that would be it. And the same thing kind of applies to when you're stopping your movement as well. You take a little bit of time to slow down and get back to stopping. So I agree. The momentum thing can be a little weird to get used to if you're accustomed to more modern start-stop movement in platforming games. But I totally agree with you about the freedom of movement just being really refreshing. And it makes the game flexible as well. The levels in this game are, for the most part, these open worlds, because it's an open world video game. Not really, but the way they designed these levels was to have big, pretty open areas with different kind of platforming challenges within them. And then they'd place the stars around the levels and you'd get them one at a time, starting the level over each time. And what I liked about the movement options in this game combined with that format is that it's really fun to decide these stars are kind of roughly in the same part of the map, but on my first playthrough for star number 1, I'll go this route and the other one I'll go this route. And the next time for this other star, I can try to quote unquote speed run my way there and be long jumping and diving and all this stuff. And the other time, maybe I'll take it more slowly and kill some enemies along the way and look at the scenery or do whatever. It really gives you the freedom to play the way that you want because there's never really any time limits or anything that locks you in and tells you how you need to do it. So I think that lends a lot of the appeal to this game.
Yeah, definitely. I think the movement is a huge plus. I will say in some moments, the game can really feel like it's from 1996 and it's one of the first Nintendo 3D games. There are quite a few moments where it's just okay, the game's a little clunky in these areas, but for the most part, it's actually really impressive how an early 3D game such as this was able to incorporate some pretty sophisticated movement elements. So kudos to them on that.
Yeah.
I think the format of the game is actually really fun. Still really fun. You go to a level within a hub world and you collect all these stars and coins and then, you get a star and then I don't know that I like that you get thrown out once you collect a star. That definitely isn't present in future iterations of platforming games or collectathons.
Right.
But, for the most part, the style of that game, it made me feel or further proved to me that that collectathons and platforming collectathons can still be really good games if they're done right. Because I'm playing it today and I'm like still having fun. I'm like, okay, this format still works. I don't know why everybody I guess it was being overdone at some point, but now I would like to see more games kind of come back to that. Maybe that's the nostalgia in me, and maybe I just really like the 3D platformers, but I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. One comment I have about getting kicked out the level is I was thinking about that and how it compares to Odyssey and other more modern collectathon games. And I was thinking that I kind of like being kicked out of the level because levels are small, or a lot smaller than, we would expect nowadays. And the fact that you get kicked out and you start in the same starting place kind of makes it feel like a speedrunning grind in a way, if you choose to approach it that way, where like, okay, this star I got to pretty quickly, but now I'm more familiar with the level and now I can like move through it at a faster pace. And if you're the kind of person who really relishes like the movement and getting better at a game over time, I feel like that can kind of help give that sense of progression. Like there's definitely levels, I can't think of a specific one, but like the first star, I was like a little more hesitant than the second time. I was just long jumping everywhere, diving everywhere. And so I think there's kind of something to be said, but I can see why not everyone would like that.
You could argue that the fact that it kicks you out of the level kind of messes up the routing in terms of speedrunning. If you want to think about it in a speedrunning sense, because, in like Banjo or Odyssey or something like that, you route from star to Jiggy or whatever to the next point that you need to go to. Whereas Super Mario, you're like, okay, I go to this one and now I come back and I go to this one. So it's like different. It's unique.
Yeah, I guess it would reduce the amount of routing options, really. Make it more linear, I guess. Speaking of more linear, there are some levels in this game that are more linear in structure. The Bowser levels, I think, are the clearest example of this, where rather than being set in a kind of open environment, they really are just like platforms floating that you're just running through. And there's like really obviously a set path and all this stuff. But I really like that because that was such a big strength of every Mario game up until this point, was like these, really curated left to right experiences, maybe with some up and down in there too. In Mario 64, like these were the opportunities where they took that formula and ported it over more directly than they did with the other levels. And so I think it's kind of interesting that they give you both that more open-ended experience and that more linear experience in the same game, just in different levels. I like that a lot.
Yeah, for sure. That kind of reminds me of another thing I forgot to consider, but now you saying that makes me consider it, is as to be expected from an early N64 game, the camera kind of sucks.
Yeah.
So when you're doing those 2D levels, pseudo 2D levels, you can find yourself falling off a lot because of the way the perspective of the camera. You're like, okay, I'm like trying to do 2D right now, but I'm also still in 3D space. So I feel like sometimes the camera could be at weird angles. Also, the camera could never go through objects. So it would like hit an object. So your camera could get stuck in various places, which is kind of weird.
Yeah. Yeah. It would be interesting to play this game with, a modern, like fully rotating camera, another stick. That'd be interesting.
Remaster.
Yeah. Actually, we decided on reviewing this game before the news of the re-releases came out or anything like that, but it is good timing. So
I feel like several times in our podcast that has happened. Like we were like, okay, let's do this game. And then like either a remaster or like a re-release of a game will come out and it'll get popular again, or like a sequel or another iteration. Like I think Luigi's Mansion was very similar.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe the fact checkers on that. You mentioned the hub area some time ago, and I want to draw attention to how great of a feature I think that is. The fact that they give you this wide open area with very few hazards to learn about the movement if you're unfamiliar. It's a really creative way of connecting levels to levels. And we've seen that formula be so influential in this genre, or games inspired by this genre moving forward. I think Princess Peach's Castle is such a great setting with different areas that feel very distinct. And the game, it gives you options to progress. Like you don't have to fully clean out levels to move on to the next larger area. You just have to get the amount of stars in whatever order you want. So between that and just the creativity of the hub area, I think they knocked it out of the park in that regard.
Yeah. It's interesting to see them like go from like Super Mario World, where it's like there's a hub world, but it's really just selecting like what level you want to go to.
Yeah.
Whereas they're like, okay, let's make that 3D. And I think that's really creative.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if they were the first ones to do that, but They got to be up there. And they kind of like took their iteration of like 2D Mario and they're like, okay, but now you can move in the hub world by yourself and do whatever you want. And that kind of brought the open world aspect to it.
Yeah. Well, that idea wouldn't really work in 2D because like when you're only traveling left and right, like there'd be either all the levels would have to be really close together or they'd be far apart and you just have to like travel everywhere and like take warp doors. Like some of the Kirby games do that where they have hub worlds that are like 2D. And I think it's neat, but it definitely it's not as functional as it is in this game.
It could be like a Zelda dungeon kind of thing, but
yeah, maybe so.
Imagine Zelda Dungeon Mario.
Damn. I thought it was interesting how they handled the power-ups in this game. You know, we're used to the super mushroom and the fire flower and all that stuff from prior 2D games. But here you have the wing cap, which lets you freaking fly, which very cool once you think about it. Like, they're really throwing everything at you. You know, you got your 3D movement. People are like, what is this joystick? And then as soon as you get comfortable on the ground, they're like, you can fly now. It's like, whoa, dude. You got the metal cap, which is kind of like the star in that it makes you invincible and you can just kill enemies on contact. But you can also sink down to the bottom of the ocean, which is my favorite thing to do. So I'm glad that they put it in a video game.
Yeah.
And then the vanish cap, which makes you intangible, which is very situational, but it's kind of a neat effect. But I thought it was interesting how they changed up the power-ups from what we expected. Maybe the other ones didn't translate very well into this game. They would bring the fire flower back like for Galaxy and things like that. So interesting that they didn't do it right at the jump. But I thought that they were cool additions, and especially the wing cap just giving you, again, so many more moments of freedom and exploration.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think there were several moments in which the team got really creative in that regard, and like all the different mini games that you could play, and like you said, the abilities of the hats, and yeah, for sure, flying around as Mario, you're like, this is possible? Which I guess, you know, like there's kind of that movement with the cape in Super Mario World, but
yeah,
but really just putting it in 3D perspective was just so cool. And just, I remember that being one of the biggest appeals about Super Mario 64. In fact, that's on their front cover of their box.
That's true. That's a good point.
Is Mario in like a winged cap. So they probably really wanted to strike home with that one. They're probably really impressed with what they did, and rightfully so. I mean, that's really hard to program and do. So kudos to them on that.
Kudos indeed. One of the last points I have about gameplay is the water levels. I feel like they are a chore gameplay-wise, and this isn't any surprise to most gamers, I guess, because water levels have earned a reputation over the years. You know, it's always like, here's this game with all this cool movement, and then you go in the water and it's all thrown out the window for the sake of variety, I suppose. So this game kind of suffers from that too, which, again, doesn't make it unique. But I've always found them to be a chore to play through because the swimming is very slow. There's no, cool jumping and somersaulting in the water. But they did make up for it with some very beautiful aesthetics in the water area. So they have that going for them. But I kind of wish they had omitted them. In fact, I wish most games didn't have water levels, but maybe that's just me being a salty boy.
Man, Water Temple really did a number on you, didn't it?
I like the Water Temple, except for the whole pause menu Iron Boots thing. But anyway, continue.
Yeah, no, I kind of agree. Swimming is a chore. I agree to some extent. I don't know if they shouldn't have done it, period, but maybe make it better would have been nice. I mean, also sliding I find really annoying. So like if you're like accidentally falling down something, I'm like, okay, I'm maybe about to die right here because I can't stop sliding. But there are several gameplay mechanics where you're like, okay, they didn't do this very well. And I think that has to do with early implementations. And swimming is definitely one of them. Nobody wants to mash a button over and over again to do swimming, nor does your controller want you to do that.
Yeah.
But I can see that. It's pretty good criticism.
Actually, I lied. I have one more point. It's a small one, though. I found that the game usually ran pretty smooth, which I enjoyed. There were some moments where there's like a lot of stuff going on the screen, and so the game slows down. It's not like a frame rate drop. It's just the game straight up slowing down. But otherwise, I found that, for being such an early game of this type, I found the performance was pretty good. And so I enjoyed that playing through my 70-star run the other day.
Yeah, most of the game does a pretty good job. Like you said, there are still some moments where it lags or frame rate drops or whatever, but there's not a lot of times where that happens. Speedrunners might tell you differently.
Epic pro gamers. That's about all I got for the gameplay. That's the most notes I have out of any section, so maybe the other ones will be a little bit shorter.
Yeah, boy. I'm ready to give the rating for it.
All right, well, why don't you go ahead and do that, brother?
93. I thought, very solid all around, but there were some gameplay critiques that I have, and it does feel clunky in some areas. But overall, really solid performance. 93 is up there on my top gameplay games. So I'm probably just like a gameplay snob, but 93 is a really good score for me.
Yeah, I agree. I gave it a 90 myself. I'm right up there with you. Same general opinions. A gameplay snob is a great thing to be. We've talked about how that's probably the most important part about video games, because otherwise, why not watch a movie or a YouTube video?
Exactly.
So awesome. That's a good start.
I agree.
We got another section coming up. Everyone's favorite section.
Aesthetics. So,
get all up in the mic.
Why don't you kick it off with the visuales, Pete Boy?
I will do that. I think a great way to summarize the visuals is primitive yet charming. The visuals, in my opinion, and probably most people's, is the thing that's held up the least well over time, just because of the newness of the technology. No surprises there. And I think that some of the more like naturalistic areas in the game, like your hills and your mountains and your whatever, like those are the ones that suffer the most from the limitations of the time and the limitations of the experience of the devs in this regard. Many of the other environments, like the built environments, the castles, the inside of the pyramid and the desert land, like those things I think look a lot better, just because of the amount of detail and the geometry being simpler, because it's more like, angles and right angles and stuff. Yeah, so I wouldn't call this a very pretty game, really, by today's standards, but there's still like that color and the character of it that makes it visually pleasing, if not in like the fidelity regard, you know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. I think I wrote somewhere in my notes that like I talked about this point, and I was like, I think it does a pretty good job, but it definitely doesn't age well. And then I said, in quotes, although my bias calls this charm.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good point. Primitive, but charming. It definitely, it's bright and colorful, and that still holds up well, but it's pretty polygonal. I don't know how
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it does a pretty good job, and it does a good job of immersing you into Mario's 3D world for the very first time. A lot of people were probably wondering, okay, what's Mario's world going to look like in 3D? Like, what's that going to be like? And I think it does a really good job of like taking you to different parts of Mario's, like I said, world, places you've probably never seen before or didn't think about in this perspective. And I think it sets a pretty good precedent for, years to come of what 3D Mario games will look like. And it is definitely an early implementation of that, but I don't think it does a horrible job, especially considering the time. But as we've said before, it doesn't age well. The animations are still cool. I think they did a really good job on the animations. Like, I think in the Japanese version, when you get a star, he does like a dab.
I've never seen that, if that's the case.
Yeah, so whenever you watch them speed run, you'll see that Mario does a dab and the peace sign, which is pretty cool. But I think in the English version that got put out, he just sticks out the peace sign. I don't know why that change was made, but who knows?
They didn't think we were ready for dabbing over here in the West, probably. Give them 30 years, they'll get around to it.
Truly ahead of its time. But I thought the animation's really cool. Like when Mario touches lava, he's like, ha, 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 and he's just like, although really annoying gameplay wise, is a really cool and unique, like, okay, yeah, that's kind of funny that Mario touches lava and he's just bouncing everywhere around the level.
Yeah.
But it does a really good job of having its own charm and feel. Granted, the technology wasn't there, but for what they did with it, I think it's decent,
Yeah.
Even still playing it today, I wasn't like, ew, So
yeah.
So I don't know. And it's kind of like, when you play a Super Mario Odyssey, there's even like an option to be Super Mario 64 Mario, which speaks to the amount of charm that it was able to bring. I know there's a lot of bias and nostalgia coming into that, but it would be interesting to see like someone who came from a more modern gaming background look back at this game and see what their opinion is. Because I think it's going to be really hard for us to maybe rank this fairly. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I had a lot of trouble giving a number to the visuals. Down with numbers, words only. um, but yeah, we'll see when we get to the score. But I agree, it'd be cool to get someone with less bias in our direction to see what they think. Again, the Bowser levels are kind of an interesting part of the visual story here because since they're such pure platforming levels for the most part, they're not set in like cohesive environments. So they kind of have like all these random like pieces, not random, but various pieces that have like cool, interesting, colorful designs to them, but they're not worried about fitting them into like the scheme of a larger world. Like, in Shifting Sandland, everything's like pyramids and like structures and dunes and all that stuff. But in Bowser courses, like anything goes. It's like just floating platforms and spinning things. And I think that's kind of cool because that sort of set the precedent for the Shine secrets in Mario Sunshine. I think that's what they're called, like those little hidden mini courses. And Odyssey has a fair share of those as well. So again, kind of interesting to see them have those little like visual playgrounds when they're not worried about making everything look natural or cohesive compared to the other levels, which do try to look natural and cohesive.
Yeah, I actually wrote something about that. I said I may have had a little bit different of a perspective on it in that some of the levels are essentially just floating 3D platforms, and it really doesn't kind of fit, like you said. But to me, I felt like that kind of hurt the consistency, and it is not as immersive as some of the other worlds were, like the desert level, Dire Dire Docks, Bomb on Battlefield.
Yeah.
You really felt like you were part of the Mario universe when you were in those levels, whereas these are just like, the fuck am I, Yeah, I don't know. I think it kind of ruined the consistency, but I can see what you're saying. It's kind of like a fun extra level. I don't know. There were some levels still. What was it, like the big and tiny one?
Oh, yeah. Tiny, huge island.
Yeah, it's just kind of like one floating platform, like one giant floating block that you kind of maneuver around. And I don't think it wasn't really that great of a level, in my opinion, because of that. It was just kind of just like, okay, this is just there.
Yeah, there's some levels that definitely, hide the floating island nature of it better than others. Like Tiny Huge Island is definitely one of the worst offenders. And like Lethal Lava Land as well. Like it's really just a square of lava floating in like the abyss with a bunch of stuff on top of it.
Yeah.
But then like Shifting Sandland, like it disguises it better with some of the dunes and stuff. But again, that's like limitations of the time, and how much that means to you is kind of up to your own personal opinion. It's just interesting to think about all these things from a critical standpoint. This game does have a few cutscenes. There's not very many of them, but there's the intro cutscene where Lakitu with a camera is swooping through the castle grounds. There's the ending cutscene where Mario saves the day, is reunited with Princess Peach, and they have a little conversation, which is kind of cute. It's got voice acting as well. So there's not too many moments like that, but I thought they were pretty artfully done. I thought that the quote-unquote camera work, I guess it is literally camera work, just a different kind of camera, I thought it was pretty good and just helps to start and end off the game with these fun little cinematic moments.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Like you said, there's not too many of them for me to really just be like, oh yeah, Super Mario 64's cutscenes are just amazing. Like how we were with one of the Metroid games, not Fusion, but
Zero Mission.
Zero Mission. Yeah, we were like, dude, the cutscenes. Yeah, no, this one, yeah, it does a pretty good job, but for the most part, like Princess Peach's opening thing is just a model, her blinking, and then a piece of paper. But the voice acting, yeah, for sure, because at this time, voice acting wasn't a huge thing in video games. It was still on the rise. Like only some games implemented it. So really nice to see that they had the Dear Mario.
Dear Mario. We'll talk more about the voice acting in the audio section. The last comment I have about the visuals is the user interface, the menus, the UI, the Wii, the GUI.
The GUI.
GUI. I feel like the UI at the very beginning of the game where you're presented with the 3D model of Mario's head and you can like play around with it. I thought that was super funny and fun and just like a cool little diversion before we get into the meat and potatoes. And then that file select screen was kind of cool where you have the hand cursor that you're moving around and you click on things. It's got some nice music. But other than that, I was kind of disappointed in how plain a lot of the user interface looked in the game. And it's not a huge deal. I'm not like taking off tons of points for this because like there's no need for a lot of UI in a Mario game in general. Like, you just need to know how many coins you have and lives, and that's pretty much it. But like the pause menu, whether you're in a level or out in the castle, the speech bubbles from enemies or friends or whomever, they're like really plain, just kind of like gray blocks with white text, and there's no like, it feels very unpolished and under-designed compared to like other like compared to SNES titles of the era, or compared to later games like Zelda with its crazy 3D pause menus, which obviously that game needed it more than Mario did, but it just feels a little bit plain compared to the rest of the game. And again, not a huge deal. They probably weren't prioritizing it, because they obviously want to get like the actual game graphics to be up to speed. But just another, like if I have to nitpick at something, that's one thing I'll nitpick.
What 64 game would you say did a good job of the UI?
I really liked the Zelda 64 games, actually. Both mostly in terms of aesthetics I'm talking about here, not so much how they actually functioned.
Oh, okay.
Although I do think they functioned well enough, but like in Zelda, for example, which did come out like 2 years after this game, just the way, like the graphics that they used in the menu and the renderings of the items, and it just felt very like animated and fun.
Yeah.
That would be one of the premier examples. But as far as examples from around this time period, I'm not sure that I like have thought about it enough to give you an example.
Yeah, because I was trying to think back at it, and I was like, there weren't too many like outstanding GUIs of this time. I think it's because the way that the graphics card was, it was like everything was meant to be. I've done a little bit of dabbling in like Homebrew 64. Everything was meant to be in like 3D. So it's like anything that was 2D seemed abnormally hard to program. That's at least from my perspective of going through that. But yeah, I could see that, how like, the opening menu was really nice and welcoming, and you're like, oh yeah, I could play around Mario's face and pull him. Yeah, that's great. I think that was a hit with a lot of people.
Oh yeah.
But it is pretty bare when it comes to like text boxes and things like that. It's just kind of like, ugh. And the pause menu, I thought the pause menu was okay. There's, like you said, not a lot needs to be there, but I think it did a good enough job for what it was. And then like before you enter every level, that's a pretty iconic of like menu, like
oh yeah,
UI.
for sure.
And I thought they did that pretty well. Everybody
pickle.
knows like, yeah, everybody knows that like UI screen. So I think that's a pretty iconic UI screen. So I think in some places they did well, and other places like, yeah, text boxes and things like that.
Yeah. And again, my opinion, kind of small potatoes compared to other things, but I just felt like having the convo.
Your opinion matters to me, buddy.
Thanks, man. That's why we do the show.
Hell yeah.
Well, that's all I got. Do you have any closing remarks for visuals before I give my score?
Nope. I think the general gist is that, it does a pretty good job in a lot of areas, but ultimately it does look kind of old and is aged well, or hasn't aged super well.
Yeah, I would agree with that summary. On that note, I gave the visuals a 75.
75. Wow. I gave mine I'm going to change it from what I actually wrote down by like -1. I gave it an 84.
Damn, that's quite a difference.
Yeah, it is quite a difference. I think a lot of my 64 era bias is coming in here. But I don't know. I think a lot of people, when they go back and play this game, won't be super disappointed by the visuals. But maybe it doesn't matter to them. Maybe, nostalgia goggles is a thing here. Yeah, I think I was on the higher end. You were on the lower end.
Yeah. Yeah, as I said, I found it very hard to give a number to this rating because I was trying to like overcorrect for my bias, but I was also looking at scores I've given to other games, and it's kind of hard to be consistent with everything all the time.
Yeah. I might go as far to say as this might be the hardest like ranking I've ever had to do for a specific category for a game.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I think it was pretty tough, but I just kind of went with what I got. Yeah, I found it tough as well. All right, up next we have audio. Kev, do you want to hit us up with your thoughts on that? Hell yeah, this game has a killer soundtrack, as expected from a Mario game, really. There are quite a few soundtracks that almost everyone knows. Like you go up to anyone who's ever played, video games from like our age, you say, oh, have you ever played do you play video games? And they'd be like, no, I don't really. But back in the day, I used to play Super Mario 64. It's that kind of game, right?
Yeah.
And everybody knows Super Mario 64 songs. So it's like, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Everybody knows that theme song. I mean, come on. Bomb on Battlefield. Yeah, it's just hugely iconic in many ways for its soundtrack. But I think of all of the soundtrack, I think a lot of people would point out like Dire Dire Docks, Bomb on Battlefield, and just a few other things. But yeah, really, really killer soundtrack. And also the sound effects are really good in this game too. I think they hold up even today. Even like simple things like running across small ponds of water.
Yeah.
Which I thought was like probably the best sound effect ever.
Yeah, you get like a really nice, satisfying little like.
Yeah, yeah. I remember, liking that as a kid and still liking that now. And I'm just like, it just holds up so well.
Yeah, I agree with everything that you've said. I honestly don't have too many more points other than the voice acting. I guess we said we would talk about that.
Oh, right.
Charles Martinet, not sure how to pronounce that, but
Yes.
his voice of Mario, I mean, we're talking about things being iconic. That's the
Legendary.
the iconic thing. Legendary. What a legend. Yeah, I mean, his voice clips for like pretty much every single thing Mario does. Some may find it annoying. I find it incredibly full of fun and personality.
I agree.
I mean, can you imagine playing this game without Mario going, huh, woohoo, yeah,
Woohoo! Yeah, no, you can't. Like, it set the precedent for what, like I said, this game set a lot of precedents, and one of them being is how Mario sounds from here on out.
Yeah, I think it's super fun. Fun fact about Peach's voice actor, Leslie Swan. She was heavily involved in a lot of localization efforts around this time for Nintendo. If you watch a lot of Nintendo credits from this era, you'll see her a lot. She provided the voice for Peach in this game and some other games. And apparently she was 26 years old, which is pretty much our age currently when she recorded this, which blew my mind when I learned about it the other day. I was like, damn, I thought she was going to be like in her late 30s or early 40s or something. How could someone like my age be part of this like literally iconic game, as we've said over and over again? And I think she helped with some of the writing too in this game, like some of the translations and things like that. So shout out to Leslie Swan, put some respect on her name. But yeah, her and Charles Martinet did a great job on the voices.
For sure. I think there's a voice for Bowser, right? But it's just more like a...
Yeah, Bowser sounds nice and threatening. I really love the Bowser sound effects from this era.
Yeah.
I kind of liked it more when he sounded more like a monster and less like a kind of,
Yeah, I kind of agree. I think it was... I thought that's always what Bowser was going to sound like until like they started like modernizing it a little bit more, which is great and all, but sometimes I don't want things to be modernized.
Yeah.
But
I like to be stuck in the past.
Exactly. Nostalgia goggles again, probably, but
yeah,
this is the best Bowser. Except in terms of like how Bowser looks. Bowser definitely looks a lot better now.
Oh yeah. Bowser in this game, I should have said that in visuals. Bowser, he has some weird stuff going on in the facial region.
Oh man, poor guy.
I'm sure they did their best. My one complaint, and this is a very small complaint about the audio, is I do wish that Tick-Tock Clock and Rainbow Ride, the last two levels in this game, they use the same music as the slide minigames from elsewhere in the game.
Yeah.
Which, if you're unfamiliar, it's very, very high energy music. Kind of makes sense for these levels because they're some of the more difficult levels in the game and there's a lot of movement. But these levels also have a lot of periods where you're just kind of waiting for something, which I think isn't great from a gameplay perspective, but also from a music perspective. It's like, and you're just like sitting waiting for your carpet to get somewhere. It's like, it'd be nice if the music was maybe a little more appropriate for this. But of course, like, I'm sure, given all the limitations, blah, 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 only so many soundtracks that they could fit into the game at this point, probably. So another nitpick kind of along the lines of my UI comment in terms of it not being super critical. But I just want more music, man. I'm a music guy. I like to hear as much music as possible.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I agree with that sentiment. That's really all I have to say about that. It makes me wonder with that comment, like, what would a second Super Mario game on the 64 have looked like?
Damn.
I don't know.
Send us your thoughts on twitter.com/the IG_game. Reader, viewer, listener question of the episode. I will say one of my last comments. I love the grand epic nature of the final battle against Bowser, and the music is a huge part of that. Like, you have this really foreboding like organ music coming in when you're fighting that big boy at the end. It's very cinematic, and I love it.
Yeah, kind of like ominous, and like it builds up really nicely.
I agree.
To this final event.
And who could forget the infinite stairway music when you're trying to get up to the last Bowser level before you have the right number of stars, and the staircase just keeps looping, and it's like yeah. It actually does. So it sounds like it's continually ascending. I'm going to nerd out just for a little bit here. It sounds like it's continuously ascending, and that's called a shepherd tone. It's a type of audio illusion where basically like high notes fade into low notes at a certain point in the cycle, and it just keeps repeating. It's a very cool effect, and yet another iconic audio moment for this video game that I'm sure a lot of people have nightmares about to this very day.
For sure. Well, I don't have too much more to say about the audio.
Nah, I don't either. I mean, it's so good, and like you can only say that so many ways.
Well, I wonder what you're going to give it.
You go first.
Okay, well, I gave it a 98.
Damn. I pretty much agree. I gave it a 95.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to give it 100, the way you were talking about it.
If only Rainbow Ride and TikTok Clock had unique soundtracks, I would have given it that straight hundo. But you know what? Po Body's nerfed.
Damn. Okay, well, moving on to content, the last section of the episode. Pete Boy.
Yeah.
Take it away.
I'm a fan of the content, for sure. I think there's a very good amount of content, whether you're an experienced player or less experienced. So howlongtobeat.com, my best friend in website form, says it takes like 12 hours for the main story, which I'm assuming is a 70-star run versus completionist. And whether that's true or not, I did, as a more experienced Mario player, but not a speedrunner by any means, I did enjoy kind of the shorter nature of the game. And this goes back to a comment that I think you made about Super Metroid. And I keep going back to this comment because I thought it was really, really smart and intelligent and wise of you to say this.
Oh, wow.
But you said that Super Metroid is like a nice chunk of game. Like, it's something that you kind of turn on and you play it for like one night or 2 nights and then you're done. And it's like a really satisfying little burst of gaming perfection. And that's how I feel about this game as a more experienced player who's able to do the run in like somewhere between 3 and 4 hours, which is a lot faster than many people, but a lot slower than speedrunners. But I imagine for someone who doesn't go through the game as quickly, there's still a lot of time to like explore and figure out things. And it's not going to be, it's not going to be Breath of the Wild in terms of the scale of the game, but the amount of time you spend with it's going to be really good.
Right. Yeah. No, I definitely agree with all of that. That's definitely a point that I wrote down. Depending upon how savvy you are with 64 games or like your experience with this game or whatever, it could probably take you around like 10-ish hours to do like or more to do like a 70-star run. And then I wrote down 3 hours if you're Peter. But
oh yeah, brother.
And I've heard that a casual 120-star run is actually quite hard and challenging. I heard there's some stars that are pretty hard to obtain, but my brother, being a complete kind of novice and not really, I mean, he played my Nintendo 64 when we were, younger, but he kind of really grew up with the Xbox generation. So he struggled a little bit more in certain areas with like the movement and things like that. So it took him a little bit longer to get some stars. I don't know exactly how long it would have taken me, but I can imagine it would have taken me less than 10 hours or so. And then I think my brother would probably taken him like 10 to 15.
Yeah.
So maybe mine's like 5 to 10, his like 10 to 15. So yeah, it's a really good chunk of time, but not like a super long chunk of time where like if you think about playing it again, it's like, oh, I got to go through all that again. You're like, oh no, yeah, I could enjoy playing through Super Mario 64 again. And I wrote down that it has super high replay value because of this. I mean, it could be as short or as long as you want it to be. You can collect 30 stars and do a backwards long jump to get through a bunch of stuff. Or you can go for what I like to call an ASAP run and do 70 stars and go for or you can go for the hundo and do 120 stars. So it could really, your run could be as short as long as you want it to be. And it's kind of the beauty of this game and its content. It's really concise. And I think that's one of its strengths. And there's still a lot of content within the game. And, as we had mentioned before in some of the gameplay elements, like the hat abilities of like the wing hat that makes Mario fly, Metal Mario, what did you call it?
The Vanish Cap.
Vanish Cap. All of those things kind of make it a unique Mario experience in itself. And there's some really cool mini games, and it's a really unique quick burst of gaming, or a longer burst of gaming if you want it to be.
Yeah. And the fact we had talked about at the very beginning of this episode, the movement flexibility and how like each person has their own play style. Like if you want to change up your own play style some way or another, then that's yet another way to add this variation and increase the replayability. So both on the game's own terms and also on your terms, there's a lot of different ways to enjoy Super Mario 64. I think the presentation of the game is top notch. Again, as expected, Nintendo trying to make a big splash with this iconic video game. Take a shot every time one of us says iconic during this episode.
Right.
The writing in particular, I think, is top notch as well. Reading the dialogue and like all the little signs throughout the game and the characters and all that stuff. It's something I couldn't quite appreciate when I was younger, partially because I didn't know what some of the words meant. The game actually does have a decent vocabulary on it. And reading it now, I can appreciate some of like the puns that they were going for that I didn't quite understand when I was younger. Nothing like, it's not one of those like Disney jokes that are actually adult jokes, like nothing like that. Just, I don't know, just general word knowledge you get from being older, I guess. But the game has so much personality and the writing that I want to just kind of shine a little bit of a spotlight on it. And as far as other presentation, it's just got a lot of polish, like little details like Mario falling asleep and, dreaming if you don't move the control stick for enough time. Even different animations, like if Mario jumps from a high place and lands in snow or sand, like he'll get stuck either head first or feet first, depending on what animation he was in. It's just like so many little things like that. Easter eggs like Yoshi being on top of the castle after you get all the stars. Yeah, just lots of little touches that make the game shine.
Yeah, I wrote down that as time has gone by, I believe there are many secrets and Easter eggs that are hidden within the game that people have discovered, which I found to be pretty cool. Like the Yoshi thing. I probably would have never known that. That's one of those things that like when you play it back in the day, since, internet wasn't as prevalent, like the other kids would talk about and you'd be like, really? Be like, yeah. And you don't know whether it's true or not because they would say the same things about like Pokemon. And you'd be like, oh, you could really do that in Pokemon? And it turned out to be like a myth, like a common myth. So you weren't ever really sure, but you're like, I heard this from someone that you could do this. So that's kind of what makes it really cool. But now we know like all the little secrets and Easter eggs and all that stuff. So I don't know too many of them, but I know that there are some. But I did know about the Yoshi thing. I will give it a little bit of critique though, in that other than the game itself and in the content that it offers, there's not a lot of extra content. And I think, it was designed to be like that because like most Super Mario games are designed to be simplistic and straightforward. And I do think it's a Mario game that very much added to the lore of Mario and set the precedent for future 3D Mario games, as I've already mentioned. But it does lack a little bit of extra content for you to kind of do some extra things that aren't within the normal realm of the game. Like it is pretty straightforward. You go and you collect the stars and the coins, and you can get up to 120 of them. But other than that, what is there really to do?
What would be an example of like possible extra content that would make your opinion a little more favorable?
So, for example, take Majora's Mask. Majora's Mask, you can go through all the dungeons, beat them all, and you could do that. But you could also collect all the masks and, get some different side quests and things like that. And you can get the Fierce Deity mask and, go through the game that way. Anything that kind of deviates from the normal gameplay and like kind of adds content to it. You know what I mean? Like stuff that's not required, but is like optional that you can do and sometimes might be harder to obtain. Just extra content like that.
Yeah, I guess I don't really share that same critique, which is fine. I'm also probably giving it more of like a pioneer pass, if you will. Like the game was so iconic already. Like they probably didn't feel the need to add in the extra content because they were doing so much already. But I see what you're saying, like from a modern standpoint, if you do like a little more variety in the tasks that you can do or what have you, then maybe it's a little disappointing in that regard.
Yeah, well, I think you had mentioned something about this in like Star Fox 64 maybe, where you had wished they had put in a little bit extra. I don't know, you had your whole excerpt on
Yeah, my college thesis on Star Fox 64. That's just because I'm just so much more passionate about that game than silly old Super Mario, you know what I mean?
Well, I think one of the things you mentioned is you wish there were more
like unlockables, I think was specifically what I was getting at.
So this game has that same problem in that there's not really there aren't unlockables. There's not really any extra content. You can't unlock Luigi like everybody tells you could have back in the day.
L is real.
But I think they worked towards that maybe. I don't know. But just kind of that stuff. It would be neat if they incorporated maybe just a few things that you could do, or you could even utilize Yoshi if you unlocked him or something. Maybe something like post-game thing, like after you beat the game, like you have access to X thing.
Yeah.
I think that would be cool. It definitely, if it was added, would make the content better.
Yeah.
So if it's not there, I'm going to deduct some points for it. I wouldn't say this is the most content-filled game. It's a Mario game, so it's pretty simplistic. But like we've mentioned, it's a really nice one to go through and just kind of play. Like, I don't think I could ever justify giving this game like 100 on content, but I think it does a very solid job.
Yeah, I agree. In fact, I think that might be a good note to end the section on. That's all my thoughts. It sounded like you were kind of winding up as well.
Yeah, that'll do it.
Cool. What's your score?
Well, I gave it an 87.
Nice. I'm kind of there with you. I gave it a 90.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
So sounds like we're pretty similar in that regard. We were similar in lots of regards in terms of this game, except for visuals. So we'll do some number crunching and see how the scores turn out. And we'll get back to you after this short ad from our sponsors.
Yep. Kev, where's the sponsors? I don't see them.
I don't know. Where are they? I can't find the sponsors. Give me a sponsor. Give me a sponsor.
Is it possible to find these sponsors?
Not from this podcast.
What's up, guys? It's your favorite video game podcast, the Interstate Gamers, back at it again with the white fans. Did some number crunching. Kevin, why don't you summarize your scores?
Sure. Well, I gave it I gave gameplay a 93. And for my aesthetics section, I gave visuals an 84 and audio a 98, which gave my aesthetics rating. Hang on, I forgot to actually look this up.
Damn, please hold.
My aesthetics rating is a 91. My content was an 87. So this brought my overall score to an exact 90.
Dang, that's hot and fresh if I've ever seen it.
Yes, indeed.
On my end, I got a 90 for gameplay.
Cool.
Got a 75 for visuals and a 95 for audio, which makes my aesthetics. Actually, I didn't calculate that either. Oh, it would be an 85. That's an easy average to do. 85 for the aesthetics. And then for content, I gave it a 90. So my overall score is an 88.3 repeating.
Dang, pretty close.
Yeah.
That makes our IG score 89.2, which is 22nd overall, tied for 22nd overall. It's tied with Pokemon Fire Red, Leaf Green. Interesting. Yeah. Of our like almost 50 games at this point, I think we're at 43. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, that's lower than I might expect from the number one Nintendo 3D platforming game. But, you know, for me, the visuals definitely like put a big dent in the total score overall.
Yeah, for sure. When I was doing my scores, I was like, there's no way I wanted to give this an A for myself. So I maybe it was set out to do so. But when I was doing the rankings and just kind of doing them honestly, I was like, you know what? It does kind of come out to an A. And sure enough, it's an exact solid lowest possible A. I think it's still there. The gameplay is just really good. And so is the audio, obviously. So
yeah. And, you know, I think it's kind of appropriate for it to be tied with Pokemon Fire Red, Leaf Green, because I'd argue that's also a seminal installment in its own franchise. They're both like big Nintendo heavyweights, and both of those games are often revisited for various reasons and modded also. If you're talking about extra content in Mario 64, there's a huge modding community just waiting for you. So any listeners out there who may be interested, definitely check that out. Well, dang, this was a fun one. This is a great way to kick off season 5, in my humble opinion.
I agree.
You know, this is a game that's been talked about to the moon and back. And when Kevin first suggested this, I was like, I don't know if we'll have anything unique to say. But you made the good point of saying, well, we're not here to say things that no one's heard before, although that's a nice bonus. We're here to just talk about our feelings because we like to do that. And by the grace of God, some people like to listen to it. So we hope that we brought you some entertainment and some insight this fine afternoon. We have some social media if you want to get even more entertainment and insight. We have the Twitter at the IG_cast. Instagram is the IGcast, no underscore on that one. And our beautiful website, designed and implemented by K-Slugs himself, is at theigcast.com. You can go there and find a table of all of our ratings broken down into categories. It's nice and sortable. It sorts instantly, man. Like before you even think about it, it just goes and sorts by the new column. And absolutely incredible stuff. As revolutionary as the game itself, I would say.
Yeah, it's like, oh, it seems like you are thinking about sorting by gameplay. Well, let me do that for you.
Damn, get out of my head, Kevin. You're already there enough as it is.
Well, yeah, I think that's going to do it for this episode. A great one to start the season with. I can't wait to review some of the other games we have on season 5. It's going to be a hella good one, so make sure you tune in. We've got some guests lined up for this season. You know, we've got a really good season in store for you guys, so be sure to stay tuned in. Also, I'd like to give a quick shout out to our patrons. We've got Dolphin Dasher, Justin Probst, Z-Link, and Ryan Everett. So thanks to all of you who have continuously supported us throughout these months. And I know some of you, through our off season as well. So we definitely appreciate that. It's you that keep us going and keep us able to review all of these games and purchase them and whatnot, and really just able to afford the podcast. So we definitely appreciate you guys. It's a huge help.
Yeah, thank you very much. Whether you're a paying patron or a freeloader, we love having you guys listen to the show. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's been a great one, as we said, and we will see you guys on the next episode.
Hell yeah. Love you too, guys.
Love you too.